G'day guys, and today I just want to make a quick video talking about labeling and self-perception. So the idea I want to get across today is that you should watch very carefully how you label yourself, because I believe that your self-perception places an artificial limit on your ability. So if you're constantly telling yourself that you're, let's say, too stupid, too clumsy, or too weak to do something, then you are restricting yourself from certain actions or ways of thinking. So we can think of an example, I'm too clumsy, I can't possibly help carrying out all that glassware, or I'm too weak and lazy to go to the gym, I could never stick to it. It's pretty interesting to me how, with this sense of self, you can reduce yourself to a caricature, at least when it pertains to certain things. Obviously, there's a huge breadth to each person's personality, and obviously they might consign themselves to a label and a specific role in one thing. They might say, when it comes to talking to women, I just can't do that, so I'm not even going to try. I'm just the guy who makes a fool of himself. But in something else, he might be really competent. Let's say he's at his job. Obviously, he doesn't think he's an idiot at his job. He doesn't label himself that way, and he's able to do his job free of the constraints of his own self-perception. Now, when it comes to these labels, there is something to be said for rationalism. We can think about past performance being a good indicator of future performance, but it's only a good indicator. It's not a certainty. You truly don't know what the limits of your ability are until you test them. And for this, I can give you an example of the gym. So a few months ago, I was sort of plateauing at the gym. I was just doing, your 100 kilo squats week in, week out, and I wasn't really progressing. I wasn't really going anywhere. So I got a program from a friend, and he essentially used like a bit of calculations based off your 1 rep max using your percentages, and it showed you how much you could squat. And so I plugged in my squat 1 rep max, and it popped up and said, hey, you should be doing 125 kilo squats. And I said, oh, come on, man, there's no way I can do 125 kilo squats. That's way too much. That's a whole 25 extra kilos. That's just too much. No way. But I said to myself, I am plateauing here. I do want to progress, so maybe this is, I'll try, and I'll just do what I can. Maybe I'll fail on the last set or whatever, but I'll try and I'll get there. And so I went to the gym, booted up the program, stuck on my headphones, and I actually did it. I was totally able to smash out these squats, and it was incredibly difficult, but I managed to do it. And that was exactly what I wanted in the gym, and I've made some good progress with that program from there. And that was a prime example of self-perception and labeling. So me telling myself, I can't do those squats, even though I don't even know, I've never even tried to rep 125 squats or whatever it was, I was restricting myself and thus restricting my gains. So again, we can think about how self-perception places an artificial limit on your ability. I considered myself too weak to go that hard in the gym, and as such I wasn't progressing as much as I could. Now I do want to make a distinction for socializing, because if you think about social situations, there can be a lot of banter that doesn't necessarily shred your confidence down to nothing. It's kind of tricky to give one rule. Well, at least I think it's tricky to give one rule. Perhaps you do have an idea yourself. So for me, it's tricky to give a single golden rule for when self-degradation in a social setting becomes harmful. And this is because culture has many permutations across the world, and within each culture there's different cliques and so on and so forth. If we think about my culture here in Australia, you'd be lucky to go through a conversation without being insulted, but maybe it's different overseas and you're a bit more polite to one another. So I think, you just have to use your best judgment, which is another skill you should be looking to hone. Perhaps there's another video on that. And so, it's interesting to me why people would get into these sort of feedback loops of self-perception. And I think one of the reasons people struggle to break out of this is because breaking out of something and going into that land of uncertainty can be quite anxiety provoking. So we can think about someone who engages with this idea that negative self-labeling isn't a good thing for them, but they're still unable to help themselves because of the anxiety or other emotions like shame or guilt that arises when they consider everything that potentially held themselves back from, I should say. So what happens is, as is often the case when anxiety arises, it becomes much easier and less confronting for people to slip into their old routine rather than to own up to themselves that they have not been potentially living their best life. So there's multiple sort of stopgaps as to why people would fall back into these routines, or maybe not look to push themselves. And that's, of course, where, friends and family can come in to help push you and that sort of thing. If we go back to the gym, we can think of a gym buddy, encouraging you or shaming you. They're both kind of the same thing when it comes to the gym, into going harder. I have another example of that, actually. I had a friend who showed me a new program he was doing for shoulders. And I texted him and said, hey, this shoulder program's really good, man. I'm doing, 20 kilo shoulder press. That's great. And he sent me a text back, basically laughing at me and calling me a manlet. And I said, oh, get fucked. And then I grabbed the 25s that he was doing, and I was actually able to do that. So, if we want to achieve our best, perhaps we should listen to the counsel of our friends, which is a pretty bland statement, but perhaps it bears saying. Sometimes the most bland statements are bland because they've been said so often because they are such good advice. I encourage everyone who watches this video to pay very close attention to themselves over the next few days. You want to actually watch yourself, watch what's happening rather than just seeing as you go throughout the day. There is a difference between watching and seeing. And attempt to notice the points, and it may be difficult, it may be very subtle, where you give yourself a label. And then you need to ask yourself, is this label founded in reality, or is it just something that I've constructed for myself? And if it is something I've constructed for myself, is it hampering my ability to live my best life? And I've been going through a lot of this at the moment. There's, a lot of behaviors that I thought I would not enjoy, and I've sort of rationally determined this because of reasons, which I won't bore you all today, but I took a chance recently, and I've begun partaking in various social activities that perhaps I wouldn't have done before because I considered myself to be a very introverted person. And so in that, I was telling myself, I'm not going to like these social situations anyway, so why bother? And I never bothered to empirically test it, and I've gone out and done that, and it's actually been quite fun. And that is, a bit sad in a way because, I've missed out on many social opportunities because of this self-perception. But on the other hand, I can now be very, very pleased in the knowledge that I'm closer to recognizing what I actually am rather than this constructed reality. I've got a better idea of who I am and what I like, and now I can go and live my full life based on that. So that's really good. Self-knowledge is always a really good thing. It's probably the best tool that you can have for navigating this very complex world we live in, because you're stuck with yourself, and if you have no idea who you are, then good luck navigating the very complex world we live in. It's like if you woke up one day on a ship sailing the ocean, and there's tempests and there's storms and there's doldrums and there's crazy shit, and you don't know anything about the ship. You don't know how the sails work, how the rudder works, the bilges, do you have cannons, all this stuff. If you have no idea anything pertaining to the ship you're on, well, you're not going to do a very good job of sailing the ocean. And that's a pretty good metaphor for self-knowledge, obviously, because you want to have a good idea of who you are when you're attempting to navigate this very complex world. So once again, as is the case with these videos where I just start spitballing into the microphone, I'm not making the claim that I'm any kind of guru or master of self-knowledge or anything like that. What I'm doing is I'm putting an idea out in the public sphere for people to have a look at and critique and add to and things like that in order to further my own knowledge and obviously those of other people. It's an open discussion down in the comments and that sort of thing. As I've said before, I'd rather have the right idea than be right. So if I am wrong or if I'm missing something, please feel free to add it down in the comments below. As always, I hope I've been able to add some value to your life with this video. Good luck everyone with your journey of self-mastery. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.